The Bible says, where there is no vision, the people perish. And I think in our country, from time to time, a little clarity can help us. It seems like we are a little confused about some things in speaking about America, and as an American, for me. Here's a verse I want to read to you in Galatians 6. Brethren, if a man in chapter 5, stand fast therefore in the liberty by which Christ has made us free, and do not be entangled again with a yoke of bondage. God sent His Son to become a man, to die on the cross, to be buried, to be rose, and to rise again, in order that we might be free. He did all of that for our freedom. We were in bondage. We were under the curse of the law. And so it's the most wonderful thing about our Christian faith, what Christ did for us. And so in a few moments, I want us to remember some aspects of that, to go back in the past, because when we go back in the past, it helps us to live in the present. That's why history is so important. There's some parallels between what's going on in our country today and the Christian faith. So what I wanted to do was to give you a little history lesson. It's a little different. Anytime I say I'm going to do something different, some of you go, oh me, or uh-oh. But I'm going to give you a little history today, because history helps us to go back in the past and appreciate more of the present. And it even does more than that. It gives us hope and confidence for the future. The symbol we have for our country is the flag. We have 50 stars on our flag, and we have stripes of red, white, and blue. We're not going to go into all the intricacies of the flag today, but the flag did not always have 50 stars. We had the Revolutionary War in 1776 and beyond. And then within the first 50 years of our country, even at the year of 1812, we only had 15 stars on the flag at that particular juncture in the history of our country. In 1812, our country was still just starting to get out of diapers, if you will. We were such a baby. We were in our infancy. We were still very vulnerable as we were trying to progress in becoming the country, of course, that we are today. On the other hand, even though we had beat the British in the Revolutionary War, the British Empire was vast, powerful, comprehensive, global. And the threat was always in the back of the minds of the Americans on whether they could keep what they had so desperately fought for and many had died for. That threat was compounded by what the British was doing, or what they were doing, in that interim period between the Revolutionary War and the war that was declared by the United States in 1812. The British were commandeering our vessels, and they were taking our sailors by force to become part of their naval force. In fact, they took up to 7,000 of our men by force against their will and enlisted them into their navy. The reason they were doing that is because the British were at war with the French. with Napoleon Bonaparte. And so that was a problem. There's another problem where the British were taunting the Americans because they were blockading the Americans from trading with the French. And the Americans relied on trade. This is how they were trying to make their living, and how they were trying to build their country. And they needed to trade with the French. And the British blockaded that and would not allow it. And the Americans said, you can't do that in international waters. It's against the law. The British said, take a hike. Then the third thing the British did is they supplied ammunition and even training for the Indians, so that the Indians would attack those who were the pioneers as they were traveling westward, because they did not want the Americans to be able to expand. In fact, what the British wanted to do is they wanted to come up through Louisiana, and they wanted to take that whole Louisiana Purchase area and establish that area to sandwich in the Americans. And they were doing that with the use of the Indians. Well, that was really kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. And so the Americans declared war on the British. About this time in 1812, the British won the war with Bonaparte. And so they were able to direct all of their forces on America. And so there were many, 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 many battles that occurred. One particular battle was at Fort McHenry in late September of 1814, and we're going to kind of home in on that particular battle today, and I'll use a video in a few minutes to help us along with that. And what's different is that video is about 10 minutes long, and normally I don't do a video if I use one more than, say, 2 minutes, maybe 3 at the max, but this one's worth it. This particular video I use is not the one that was going viral on the internet. Dudley Randolph, I believe was his name, was the pastor that did that video, and he later admitted that he lifted that story from another place without checking his facts and put it to his narrative. And many of the things that he said in the video were incorrect. In fact, he said that the battle took place during the Revolutionary War with the colonies and the British, which was totally erroneous. He later made another video, but the next video he made wasn't near as good as the first one, so I discarded that one. We want to stay factual, and the point of this particular battle that we want to home in on is it deals with the flag, and it deals with the song that we sing that we married with the flag. And that's where the controversy is occurring today in our own country. We see this particularly in sporting events like the NFL, where people are taking a knee and they are protesting certain things. They're not all protesting the same thing. They've all got different ideas or thoughts about whatever, but they've decided to take their protest during the time that we normally, I don't know why it's doing that. I'm not doing anything different. They're deciding to protest while we normally reverence the flag, and at the same time we marry reverencing the flag with the Star-Spangled Banner. One of the things, before I introduce this particular battle, that I think we need to set straight is that our forefathers, I'll tell you, they were brilliant guys. They weren't perfect, though. They had a lot of faults. But they set up a foundation for our country so that we would have a vehicle to work out our problems, to work out our differences. And because when our country started, all our problems didn't go away. Just because we started the country didn't mean that justice ruled the land. We know that's not true. We know that there were many injustices that occurred in the life and the history of our country. But what our forefathers did was they gave us this foundation whereby we could, in an equitable way, work out our problems so that justice could take place, so that liberty could take place, so that fairness could take place among all Americans. You've heard people say, well, I have a constitutional right to the freedom of speech. Have you ever heard somebody say that? It's totally erroneous. The Constitution does not give you one single right, period. End of story. And we're not told this. Our young people aren't taught this when they're growing up. Our forefathers, the founders of our country, they knew better. Listen to what they said when they wrote the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Now, that didn't happen the first day. It had to be worked out, but they gave us this platform so that we could work it out. But they did state that all men are created equal and that they are endowed by their government. Now what it says? That they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Who gives us our rights? There's only one who can give it to us, and that's the Lord. That among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted. God has given us these rights. And then God gives us government so that we're able to exhibit and express these rights, to enjoy these rights that have been endowed upon us by our Creator, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Our consent to limit the government so that it can't infringe upon the rights that God has given us is called the Constitution. The Constitution doesn't give us our rights. It limits government so that our rights given by God cannot be taken away from us. This is the platform that our forefathers gave us. This platform is what many men and women who've gone before us thought was so paramount that they not only gave all of their material belongings, they even gave their lives. This is part of what our flag represents. So now we fast forward from the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution and the Revolution to the War of 1812, and we come to 1814. In the back of the American minds, are we really going to be able to hold on to what we got here? Sounds like we're going to have to continue this fight. Freedom is not free. So the British come. They come with Admiral Cochrane, and they come with Major General Ross. They come up the Chesapeake River, and then they embark upon Port Benedict. And there the Admiral lets off a bunch of men, and they go over to Washington, D.C. The Americans are not ready for them. And what do the British do? It's not good. They are coming in so fast, the Americans are not ready, and so everybody has just got to run out of there with their tail between their legs, including everyone in the White House. Who's the president? Madison, James Madison. And what's his wife's name? Dolly. They're all getting out of there in a hurry. There's only two things that Dolly can grab. She grabs a bunch of the silverware. Now, she leaves all her personal belongings behind. She's doing this for the White House to preserve something. And the second thing she grabs, along with the servants, is the huge picture on the wall of George Washington. They run out the back door as fast as they can. The British come through the front door as they're going out the back door, and the British find the table set for 40 people with all the dinner there, and everything is ready to go, and so they sit down and have a wonderful meal. And then they burn the White House. And then they burn the state capitol. And then they burn the Treasury. And then the next day they leave town. And they come back to Admiral Cochrane. And the Americans are really wondering, are we tinkering on losing our country? These next few battles are so decisive. They are so important. The admiral then gets the men, and they continue to go up the Chesapeake Bay, and then they go up the river, Patapsco River. This is going to head them into the harbor that goes into the city of Baltimore. They say they think that this particular town and this port is so important to take. So the admiral lets off his men again, and they go around the north side, and then the admiral is going to take his ships to the south to bombard Fort McHenry, not to take over the fort, but so that they have to go through the fort in order to get to the south part of the city of Baltimore so that they can sandwich it in. And the northern battle is another story. So Fort McHenry is standing in the crosshairs. There's 1,000 men there with their leader, Armistead. And they are determined to hold this fort. Fortunately for the Americans, the harbor is shallow, and many of the heavy-duty ships of Admiral Cochrane cannot get close enough to shell the fort. Nevertheless, he's got a lot that can. And so not only is he going to be firing cannon shells, he's going to have rockets, rocket glares. Think about that for a second. And so this is where we come to this place of Fort McHenry in this battle, and we think about the meaning of our flag and the marriage that we put with this flag, the Star-Spangled Banner. So I want us to watch this video now so that we can learn a little history lesson that will help us appreciate the present.
Dawn, September 13th. The bombardment of Fort McHenry commences. From their position 2 miles away, heavily armed British bomb ships unleash an early 19th century version of shock and awe.
This is the most powerful, destructive force known to man. In 1814, 1,500 of these are thrown at the fort, exploding 190-pound cast iron bombs. This is what's striking fear into the hearts of the Baltimore defenders.
Miles from Fort McHenry, the citizens of Baltimore feel the power of the British artillery volleys. A local newspaper reports.
The houses in the city were shaken to their foundations. For never, perhaps from the time of invention of cannon to the present day, were number of pieces fired with so rapid succession.
8 miles away, a 35-year-old Georgetown lawyer named Francis Scott Key watches the bombardment aboard an American truce vessel. Just prior to the battle, he had arrived at the British fleet in Chesapeake Bay to secure the release of a friend. But before they can leave, the bombardment of Fort McHenry begins, and they're trapped. Key now finds himself in the middle of the storm.
Francis Scott Key is amazed and appalled by the bombardment that's going on. The absolute foundations of both Fort McHenry and Baltimore are being rocked by these 200-pound bombs that are being hurled at the fort.
As the Royal Navy bombards Fort McHenry, Colonel Arthur Brooke resumes the infantry attack on Baltimore. When he comes on the position in Hampstead Hill, he is amazed at what he sees. Strongly emplaced American troops behind extensive earthworks, well armed with artillery. While the British infantry advance on Baltimore, the bombardment of Fort McHenry continues into the afternoon. Heavy rain and 13-inch mortar shells deluge the fort. At about 2 p.m., a mortar shell arcs over the walls, killing a gun commander and wounding several soldiers. Private Isaac Monroe recalls the devastation inside the stronghold.
Sergeant Clem was killed by my side, a bomb bursting over our heads. A piece the size of $1, 2 inches thick, passed through his body.
Moments later, a bomb makes a direct hit on this powder magazine, where over 250,000 pounds of powder are being stored. This is the main powder magazine for the defense of Baltimore itself. If this goes, the entire fort will go. If the fort goes, the city may very well fall.
But miraculously, the shell fails to ignite, saving Fort McHenry from utter destruction. Despite the unprecedented onslaught, American troops inside the fort counter the attack with lethal force of their own. By nightfall, the bombardment has lasted more than 12 hours. The sky over Fort McHenry is ablaze with lightning and rocket glare, as deafening thunderclaps and artillery blasts shake and rattle all of Baltimore. One U.S. Marine is awestruck by the dazzling but deadly sound and light show.
I think the handsomest sight I ever saw was during the bombardment, to see the bombs and rockets flying.
An order comes to extinguish the lights in all of Baltimore to prevent the British from seeing any strategic landmarks. Now, only the periodic flashes of lightning and exploding rockets illuminate Fort McHenry. Inside, Major Armistead and his men know they must hold out. The fate of the city, perhaps the nation itself, is in their hands. The only way Francis Scott Key and the people of Baltimore will know if they're successful is if the flag above the fort still waves. They watch, hope, and wait. Throughout the night of September 13, 1814, the British Navy keeps up its bombardment of Fort McHenry in Baltimore Harbor. One British midshipman recalls the relentless artillery attack.
All the night, the bombardment continued with unabated vigor. The hissing of rockets and the fiery shells glittered in the air, threatening destruction as they fell. Whilst to add solemnity to this scene of devastation, the rain fell in torrents. The thunder broke in mighty peals after each successive flash of lightning.
Inside the fort, with the smaller storm flag now flying above, Major George Armistead's men return fire.
The only means we had of directing our fire was by the blaze of their rockets and the flashes of their guns.
Those citizens of Baltimore who haven't already fled the city look on in awe and horror.
And Francis Scott Key is one of them. Throughout the night, he paces the deck of his ship in the darkness, hoping the explosions would continue, because if there's silence, it might mean the fort had capitulated.
While the Royal Navy shells the fort, Colonel Arthur Brooke, commander of the British Land Force, prepares a final attack on Hampstead Hill on the edge of the city. To aid Brooke, Vice Admiral Cochrane orders a diversionary attack against the western slope of Fort McHenry with a flotilla of 20 barges armed with artillery. But the Americans don't fall for the ploy. Instead, the American artillery pounds away at the diversionary force. In the pre-dawn darkness of September 14th, Brooke makes a momentous decision. He orders a retreat back to the ships.
September 14th, dawn. At 4:30 in the morning, the American gun batteries here at Fort McHenry fall silent. But the bombardment continues until 7:30 that morning by the British Royal Navy. And then after 25 hours of intense bombardment, silence covers the waters of the Patapsco River and Baltimore Harbor.
That silence follows the order to stop the bombing of Fort McHenry. The nighttime flotilla operation had failed. All the while, the ragged, rain-soaked storm flag still waves defiantly over the fort's ramparts. Cochrane understands that to continue fighting is futile. One by one, each British warship that only minutes before had unleashed an unprecedented eruption of artillery and rocket fire now weighs anchor and quietly sets sail into the morning mist. An American officer recalls the sight.
The enemy has been severely drubbed, as well by his army and his navy, and now it is retiring down the river after expending many tons of shot, from 1,800 to 2,000 shells, and at least 700 or 800 rockets.
It is a moment to remember. It is a moment now that would define the importance of Fort McHenry in the War of 1812, because something is about to happen.
Major Armistead quickly replaces the tattered storm flag by hoisting, as one British observer noted, a most superb and splendid ensign on the battery. The enemy has no trouble seeing it.
But gradually, the morning mists began to clear, and once more Key makes out the stars and stripes still flying above Fort McHenry. Never before has he looked with such reverence upon the symbol of his country.
Francis Scott Key, a reluctant patriot himself, a person who was not terribly political and somebody who was against the war itself, finds himself an eyewitness to this moment in American history.
I saw the flag of my country waving over a city, the strength and the pride of my native state. And does not such a country and such defenders of their country deserve a song?
Key takes out a letter from his pocket and jots down a few verses.
Oh, say can you see by the dawn's early light.
The British release Key later that morning. He returns to Baltimore and continues to work on his poem.
What so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming.
A few days after the bombardment, Key's poem, Defense of Fort McHenry, is printed on handbills and distributed throughout Baltimore.
Whose broad stripes and bright stars, through the perilous fight, o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming.
The poem is put to the melody of To Anacreon in Heaven, a popular British drinking song from the late 1700s.
And the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there.
By November 1814, the song is published in Baltimore as the Star-Spangled Banner. Soon, other cities publish the song, and it gains popularity.
Oh, say, does that Star-Spangled Banner yet wave?
Congress officially approves the song as the national anthem in 1931.
For the land of the free and the home of the brave.
The night of September 14th, 1814, fireworks again explode and light up the sky over Baltimore, this time in celebration.
I have a picture for you of the flag that they raised that morning. This is it, and they pieced it back together, and you can see it has some different, but that really doesn't give you the idea of how big this flag was. So show the next picture, Annabelle. You can see how big this flag really is. You can see the soldier on the bottom. Seeing a flag that big makes you think somebody was proud of that flag. That's what it makes you think. And so the flag helps us to go back in the past. And going back in the past helps us to have appreciation in the present. But you know, we also have a flag in our faith. Now, in the Old Testament, they had a flag, and that would have been the Passover. Every year they were to celebrate the Passover, and it would remind them of the cost of freedom, that God had brought them out of slavery into freedom from Egypt. And so they would remember that every year. God has a lot of things in the Old Testament about remembering. But in the New Testament, we have a different flag. In fact, the psalmist said, his banner over me is love. A banner is a flag. Our flag in the New Testament is the cross. The cross of Jesus Christ. We go back 2,000 years in the Lord's Supper, which we'll do next week. And we will remember the cost of freedom. Why did the Lord want us to go back and remember? Because as we remember that He laid His life down for us, it will cause us to be very appreciative and grateful and thankful for what God has done for us. So to close today, I'd like you to, well, we're going to sing the Star-Spangled Banner. If you'd like to stand, you can. So that's what we're going to do.
Can you?
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's glad gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does the Star-Spangled Banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Amen. 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 I don't know that I've ever heard y'all sing that good. Well, let's pray, and we'll go into our time of invitation, and you can think about your own life and as an American, what you can do to allow the Lord to use you to help other Americans in our country who really don't know about their history, really don't know about their past, and are ungrateful. Let the Lord use you to spread this gospel news, this good news about this great land that we live in, that God gives us this place so that we can we can freely share the good news of Jesus Christ. Let God use you to share about Christ with others in this place, this hallowed ground that we stand on, where men and women have died, for us to enjoy the rights that have been given to us by God.